Deception in Politics, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the forces shaping our world from the shadows. This is where influence becomes a weapon, where corruption hides behind polished speech, and where the truth is often the first casualty. From chilling true crime cases to calculated political manipulation, we go beyond the headlines to expose the strategies, uncover the cover-ups, and connect the dots others refuse to see. Because behind every scandal, every secret deal, and every shocking revelation, there's always a trail of power, money, and deception. Our mission is simple: follow the money, question the narrative, and reveal the truths they hoped would stay buried. This podcast is dedicated to fearless conversations, bold investigation, and asking the questions others won't. If you're ready to challenge what you've been told and see the world through a sharper lens, you're in the right place. This is Power, Deception, and Politics. Let's begin. In the shadowed corridors of Canadian academia and the fevered battlegrounds of public discourse, a chilling true crime story has unfolded, not one of blood and bodies in the traditional sense, but a slow-motion institutional assassination of a tenured professor who dared to demand evidence over emotion, science over sacred narrative, and accountability over endless grievance. Frances Widdowson, the sharp-tongued political scientist turned academic heretic, stands at the center of this drama. Her story is a thriller of ideological capture, mob justice, taxpayer-funded entrapment, and policy failures so profound they've poisoned universities, eroded free speech, and fractured national reconciliation itself. And at the rotten core, decades of failed liberal policies under the Trudeau dynasty, paternalistic handouts, virtue-signaling reconciliation theater, and a relentless push to elevate identity politics above empirical truth. That created the perfect storm for this witch hunt. Let's rewind the tape, crime scene style, and dissect how we got here, step by excruciating step. It begins in the late 1960s and 1970s with Pierre Trudeau's Liberal government. Fresh off the disastrous 1969 White Paper, which tried and failed spectacularly to assimilate Indigenous peoples by scrapping the Indian Act, the Liberals pivoted hard into a new paradigm of separation and perpetual victimhood. Instead of pushing integration, universal education standards, and economic self-reliance, they entrenched the reserve system, bloated bureaucracies, and billions in transfer payments with few strings attached. This wasn't compassion, it was a trap. Remote communities stagnated, dependency deepened, and social pathologies, addiction, violence, family breakdown, exploded. Fast forward to Justin Trudeau's era. The Sun doubled down with performative apologies. The 2015 Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, elevated to holy writ, and genocide rhetoric that framed residential schools not as a flawed assimilation effort with real educational trade-offs amid terrible conditions, but as deliberate cultural extermination. Billions flowed. Flags flew at half-mast. Unmarked graves announcements triggered national mourning in 2021 without forensic excavation. Liberal policies manufactured a climate of untouchable orthodoxy. Question the narrative, and you're not a scholar, you're a denialist, a racist, a threat to safety. Enter Frances Widdowson, Ph.D. from York University, former Northwest Territories policy analyst, and co-author of the explosive 2008 book Disrobing the Aboriginal Industry. With her partner Albert Howard, she exposed what she called the deception of endless cultural preservation funding funneled through lawyers, consultants, and activists, what she dubbed the Aboriginal industry. Billions spent, outcomes dismal. High poverty, low educational attainment, governance failures on reserves. Widdowson argued for evidence-based integration, rigorous standards, and skepticism toward parallelist approaches that treated Indigenous ways of knowing as equal to empirical science. Hired at Mount Royal University, MRU in Calgary that same year, she received tenure in 2011. For a while, the academy tolerated her barely, but the liberal machine was revving up. Trudeau's government poured fuel on indigenization mandates across universities. Mandatory decolonization training, embedding traditional knowledge in curricula, and pressuring institutions to prioritize emotional safety and reconciliation over debate. Campuses became pressure cookers where dissent equaled harm. The spark ignited around 2019-2020. Widdowson hosted a panel with Megan Murphy on trans activism's impact on women's rights, a rational inquiry in an era of rapidly shifting gender ideology. Colleagues recoiled. Then came BLM's campus wave. Widdowson called out the chaos it wrought at MRU, labeling it destructive to collegiality. She questioned residential school hyperbole, acknowledging abuses and deaths, real tragedies in disease-ridden, underfunded institutions, but noting that for many Indigenous children, especially in remote areas, the schools offered literacy, skills, and exposure otherwise unavailable. She rejected the genocide label as inflammatory overreach. This was heresy. Petitions with thousands of signatures demanded her firing, calling her racist. Liberal-fueled identity politics had trained a generation to view uncomfortable facts as violence. By 2021, the noose tightened. MRU launched investigations into her tweets, satirical jabs at woke excess, an oppression point system meme, critiques of colleagues pushing indigenization. One trans activist and Indigenous studies professors claimed harassment and a toxic environment. Amid post-Kamloops hysteria, where GPR anomalies were trumpeted as mass graves without excavation, Widdowson demanded evidence. In December 2021, MRU fired her, citing collegiality failures. A years-long arbitration followed. In 2024, arbitrator David Philip Jones ruled the termination disproportionate. Some tweets crossed into harassment, but firing a tenured professor for protected speech and satire was excessive. Reinstatement? Impossible, he said, due to irreparable relational damage. Widdowson fights on for remedies. This wasn't due process. It was a purge enabled by a campus culture radicalized under liberal reconciliation mandates that equated skepticism with harm. The drama escalates into pure thriller territory post-firing. Widdowson hits the speaking circuit, probing unmarked graves, indigenization's assault on science and academic freedom. Universities tremble. At Lethbridge, UVic, UBC, and beyond, protests erupt, drumming, shouting mobs, police called. She's arrested multiple times for trespassing after defying bans issued in the name of safety. In 2026 alone, RCMP and local police hauled her away from events, fining her while mobs roamed free. Imagine the scene. A middle-aged scholar in handcuffs for wanting to debate history while taxpayer-funded institutions cower. Liberal policies birthed this. By framing any challenge to the TRC narrative as existential threat, they greenlit no platforming and institutional cowardice. Universities, chasing federal grants tied to reconciliation and EDI, prioritized appeasement over inquiry. Then comes the CBC scandal, the entrapment sting that reeks of state media desperation. In 2026, under the guise of Forge Media, a CBC entertainment-backed project, with Canadian Heritage grants, lured Widdowson, Lindsay Shepherd, and others critical of Kamloops' claims into fake interviews. Posing as a legitimate docuseries on Canadian history and figures like John A. Macdonald, producers flew her to Vancouver, sat her on a phony Wake Up Canada set, and ambushed her with gotcha questions. Targets included an unnamed RCMP officer harassed into the mix, cops who have faced their own backlash for enforcing laws or questioning rushed grave narratives amid political pressure. The Yes Men activists and Indigenous comedians were involved. When exposed on X, CBC admitted involvement in this taxpayer-funded prank aimed at smearing denialists. Savage. This wasn't journalism, it was agitprop, enabled by Trudeau-era funding that bloated CBC into a partisan enforcer of liberal orthodoxy. Billions in public dollars, zero accountability, weaponized against citizens asking for forensic proof before rewriting history. The RCMP angle adds layers. Officers investigating or doubting aspects of residential claims faced internal and external harassment, mirroring Widdowson's ordeal in a climate where Trudeau's government demanded fealty to the narrative. How did liberal policies cause this nightmare? Trace the causal chain. Pierre Trudeau's white paper failure led to decades of guilt-driven payouts without reform, creating dependency and the Aboriginal industry Widdowson dissected. Justin amplified it. TRC implementation without rigorous auditing, genocide language without legal precision, massive funding for indigenization that turned universities into ideological monasteries. Post-2021 Kamloops, flags lowered, curricula rewritten, dissent chilled, all while actual excavations lagged, inviting skepticism. Billions spent on reconciliation yielded performative gestures, not closing socioeconomic gaps. Reserves still suffer, educational outcomes lag. Questioning this invites cancellation because the policy house of cards can't withstand scrutiny. Widdowson's persistence exposes the fraud. A stifled academy, intimidated police, captured media. Her arrests, the sting, the firing, it's all downstream of a liberal vision that prioritized votes, virtue, and division over truth and progress. This saga thrills and horrifies because it's not over. Widdowson fights in courts and public squares. Documentaries like What Remains probe Kamloops' claims, and public skepticism grows as GPR hype meets evidentiary silence. The mob howls louder, but cracks show, arbitrators acknowledging overreach, audiences hungry for debate. Canada's true crime isn't one professor's defiance. It's how failed liberal policies, from assimilation botches to reconciliation grift, birthed a censorship machine devouring its own. Frances Widdowson isn't the villain. She's the detective in a nation gaslit by its elites. The bodies, metaphorical graves of open inquiry, sacrificed on the altar of political expediency. Wake up, Canada, before the drama claims us all. And that brings us to the end of another episode of Power, Deception, and Politics. If today's conversation showed us anything, it's that the truth is rarely simple, and the real story is often hidden beneath layers of influence, power, and carefully crafted narratives. But the more we question, the more we uncover. Remember, follow the money, question the narrative, and never stop asking who benefits. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share it with someone who believes in truth over spin, and leave us a review so more people can discover the conversations that matter. This is Power, Deception, and Politics, where fearless storytelling and bold conversations take center stage. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep questioning.